And I believe we're live on YouTube. Thanks everybody for joining another NPM Open RFC meeting. Today's date is Wednesday, November 3rd. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in issue number, lost the reference here. Issue number 487. For folks that have just joined the call, I'll copy and paste the meeting notes again for you one last time. And feel free to add yourselves as attendees. As usual, we ask people to please be polite, and as others are speaking, please raise your hand and I'll call on you, and try to be cordial. Please abide by the code of conduct that we have there linked, and all calls and all communications on the NPM RFC's repo are governed and under that code of conduct. We encourage you to read it. And TLDR is please be respectful to each other. And we have a short list and agenda today, but want to give the floor for anybody if they have announcements they want to share. You can do this so now. If nobody has any announcements, we can dive right into the first item that we had here, which is RFC number 481, running prepare scripts for link bundled teps. I know, Matt, you've been joining last and keeping track of this for the last few sessions. Is there any update here in this PR?
No real update. I mean, I put the PR together to kind of like recap as best I could the discussions that we've been having and kind of the proposed changes. But there's a section here about sort of like implementation details and yeah, I guess it's just the implementation section that I need help with. I was briefly talking to Mike, I want to say, who has like collaborator rights on this fork, but I haven't heard from them since the last meeting, so I'm not really sure how else to kind of like reach out about that, or like what kind of implementation details I should get into on this RFC.
I can get you access to Mike, or I can make a connection there. Can you maybe in chat just share your email, the best email to get in contact with you? Mike's actually a local here and good friend of ours, and I can get you in touch so you have another way of collaborating, hopefully. Cool. I know he was very interested in trying to help with the implementation, so
sweet.
So I'll take that as an action on my side to follow up and make sure you get connected and make some traction happen there. Was there any other actions that other folks were owning, if you can remind me, Matt, other than you helping write this RFC, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, so there's the original RFC was kind of split into 3 steps: land NPM packlist, which I think happened in NPM 8, and an RFC about workspace layout, which I think Jordan was gonna work on, maybe.
Yeah, I volunteered to do that and have not had time to do it yet.
Is that something you might have time in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, definitely in the next couple of weeks.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's definitely also relevant to Isaac's item on the agenda.
Awesome. Any other notes then here, Matt? Anything else you want to bring up?
No, just, I mean, I guess just because it happened like 5 minutes before this meeting, and I think it's Caleb, all right, this Everett 1992, yeah, commented on the original RRFC, saying that this goes beyond monorepos. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that here and now, or
You want to just go ahead, Caleb?
I just wanted to listen in today.
No worries. We can respond async to that comment for sure. Cool. Anything else in this area? Like, I know you said that we landed. Do you know which version we actually landed that support, Matt, for the?
I think it's in 8.1, but I was I looked into it a little bit while I was working on the RFC, and I think I was maybe still missing a step or something like that, and actually trying to kind of manually force this to happen. And it's been a week or more since I've had a chance to really like dig into it, so I'm not sure where I left that.
Okay, let us know if that, like, I think we provide some kind of hacky workaround right now. If that's not working, maybe feel free to ping us in one of like the Slack channels. I'm not sure if you are part of either the OpenJS Foundation Slack channel, or there's also the Node tooling Slack channel that we usually or Slack orgs, sorry, that our team is usually in. But there's ways to get a hold of us also through like Slack orgs, so we have a bit more high touch like comms going back and forth.
Sure, yeah, that would be great. Is there like I guess I haven't seen a Slack org like join link or whatever it's called.
I can send you some references when I make the connection with Mike as well for you after the call. So I'll take that as an action to get you access to those. It'd be great to have a channel for us to chat in. NPM has Slack channels within those orgs. So there's about 2 or 3 of them that are run by the different communities that we try to follow along and use as back channels for communication.
Sweet.
And Tierney just shared the OpenJS Foundation's invite link, I think, that right there in chat. So
awesome, thank you.
No worries.
Yeah, then the only other thing for me is I do have a meeting in 20 minutes, so I'm just gonna hang out for the rest of this, then disappear at that time.
No worries, appreciate the heads up. Cool. Moving along, the next 2 items that we had are, I believe, connected. I know Vincent Bailey and Isaac have been working together a little bit. This is item 375, defining which dependencies are shared among workspace projects, and also item 484, which is our PR 484, which is creating more predictable peer depth installations. I'm not sure, Isaac, if you want to speak to this.
Yeah. So the basic idea of the RFC that I wrote is it's pretty light. It probably doesn't go as far as I think Jordan's kind of vision for this, which I think is also worth writing up, and maybe we decide to land or implement or accept one and then do the other as an extension of it, or just take his instead of it. I don't know really what the best path forward is there, but I figured just like, let's just write up the thing that is that would actually be kind of a step in the right direction, and what came out of kind of the discussion of the implementation of isolated mode that Vincent and I were looking at. Essentially, the thing that this does is it would say, don't hoist anything other than peer depths up above the workspace project bound, the workspace boundary itself. So if you have a dev dependency, regular prod dependency, or optional dependency, it would never hoist to the root, right? Second, if you have a dependency on anything that is any package which is one of the sibling workspaces, then that will always be resolved to the sibling workspace rather than fetching from the registry. And third, if you have a peer dependency from a workspace, that will always be hoisted to the root and shared among all workspaces, which is the way it currently works today. So the only change that this would introduce would be any non-peer dependencies will never be hoisted above the workspace to the root. And two, any dependencies on a sibling workspace would be resolved to that sibling workspace rather than fetching from the registry. And that would address a couple of problems that we're seeing in how peer sets kind of can end up being split apart in order to resolve things in a way that is a little leads to some confusing scenarios, particularly among with the use of Webpack and Webpack CLI and some other cases without going all the way to isolated mode style resolution. I see that Jordan's hand is up. Do you want to talk about kind of what addition you wanted to layer on top of this, or how to take it the next step further?
Yeah, well, I guess my first question is this RFC that you've written meant to change the default, or is it meant to be opt-in?
This is meant to change the default.
Okay, so
anything that works today should keep working. It's just we're going to not hoist non-peer dependencies up above the workspace boundary.
So I think this is a strict improvement over the current default. So I'm happy to see that change made. It is definitely not sufficient for what I need for my alternate layout. I still think we'll end up needing 3 layout modes: default, isolated, and then the middle one shared or something. But this change will make the delta between shared and default smaller, and I think it will break someone if they're relying on the implicit availability of hoisted dependencies, but hopefully nobody is.
Or hopefully they're thankful to have that break in dev rather than production.
Right, exactly. So yeah, it hopefully will not break anyone unhappily. But basically the point that the major difference between what the shared mode and what you're suggesting is that a peer dependency of a child workspace in shared mode would not automatically get hoisted to the root and become available to everything else. And in particular, what this would enable is for one child workspace to peer depend on React 17 and another one to peer depend on React 18, and actually to have 2 depend on React 17 and 2 depend on React 18. And these would all still work just fine, because the 2 that depend on 17 would share a React copy symlinked from somewhere else, and the 2 that depend on 18 would share a React copy symlinked from somewhere else.
Right.
A 5th package that had no peer dependency on React or dependency of any kind would not be able to require React because it wouldn't be available in its node modules graph. So obviously this is still, I still need to write up this RFC, but that's, to me, that's the big high level difference.
Yeah. So
and then go ahead.
So the use case that's maybe worth zooming into here is, and this gets tricky because right now there's no way to kind of explicitly declare this, and so we're forced to kind of guess what users are intending based on kind of what the current behavior is, and that is always a little bit perilous to do. But that being said, today, if I have a collection of workspaces within one project and they have some peer dependencies in common, one thing that's sort of a very common, it's certainly not universal, but a very common use case is I'm developing a bunch of software that is intended to kind of all work together, right? It's all part of a thing. It is not the same as we have one mono repo for our entire company, and some of these things work together and some of them don't. So that's kind of more where you're coming at it from. And I think that they're both valid use cases. And so the challenge is how to identify that? Because if it's a case where, for example, I have, let's say I wanted to take all of the submodules of the NPM CLI and put them in one workspace. At the end of the day, that's one program, and everything has to cooperate with each other, and it all has to work together. So what I really want to do in development is to say, okay, A has a peer dependency on something and B has a peer dependency on a different version, that's going to break. Like when you try to install A and B together, it's going to break. And they're in the same project, they're sibling workspaces. So like, I want to know that it's going to break. I want to see it break, because otherwise it's going to break when people try to install it. However, on the other side, if it's like, well, I have like, 4 different sort of sets of things to work on React 15 through 18, and I want to develop them all within the same workspaces project. In that case, I'm not going to use all of these things together at the same time. I'm going to kind of use some subset of them. So then the question is like, how do we kind of identify what those bubbles are, or like what those like boundaries are? When I initially took a pass at this RFC, I had something like that in mind, and went down a little bit of a rabbit hole of like how to sort of specify in the root like workspaces declaration that like these 3 workspaces share things and those 2 share things together, and it got really hairy. And I just was like, okay, there's a problem here. Let's just like take the shortest path of solving the problem, which doesn't actually require any kind of additional configuration. And I think the challenge that we're going to find, and the bike shed that we're gonna find ourselves running into with your dream, is that either we say, look, if you want to use all these things together, you've got to make them have compatible peer deps, period. And we're not going to highlight that for you, right? We're not going to tell you when that's not the case. Or B, you have to somehow identify explicitly, like at the root level, these 3 things need to work together and those 2 things need to work together, but the 2 sets don't need to work with each other. They can be isolated from each other.
So yeah, I'm envisioning the first very, very specifically, that the peer dependencies and other child workspace dependencies are the mechanism by which you declare that things are related. And from there, NPM can determine and infer what the bubbles are and then apply those constraints appropriately.
Right. It there is, so what's also interesting is there is a and we might be able to solve this in a pretty lightweight way once we have this defaults in place. We might be able to solve this in a pretty lightweight configuration approach by by actually going the step of implementing workspace groups, which we kind of want to do for other things, right? It would be nice to say, well, I want to run npm test on all my front end code or on all my server code, and I like my front end code and my server code don't need to actually be using the same version of React, right?
Right. The challenge is that you almost certainly will have a child workspace package that is shared by multiple workspace groups, and so it needs to account for that. So like I have, specifically in Enzyme's case, that's what I have, is where depending on which React version you're looking at, there's different overlapping Venn diagrams of child workspace packages.
Yeah, so maybe that's not as lightweight as I had initially hoped, but that could be just another sort of way to approach that bike shed. But yeah, it does get a little bit complicated if we're going to use the stated peer dependencies as the way to define those bubbles or those groups, because essentially then we're in a state where we're like, I have, let's say I have 10 different workspaces, and I need to figure out, what is the maximal amount of overlap that I can get. And now we're getting into like heuristics, and those bubbles might sort themselves out in surprising ways, or ways that are hard to kind of guess.
I mean, and the way that I deal with this in Enzyme is basically that I have a bunch of overly complicated scripts. So I pick a React version, and based on which version I pick, it selects the appropriate things to symlink in the appropriate places, and it sort of ignores the other ones. And that way I can run the entire repo, but it's only actually running the subset that are compatible with my quote current React version. And so I don't know if that's a good approach here or not.
You can also do this by checking out different versions of React into your project, and then having a dev dependency on React file :/React 13 or whatever. React 16. I don't know what React versions are apparently. But the kind of the dev dependency escape hatch is still a possibility for explicitly managing peer dependencies, because the dev dep will kind of clobber the peer dep when you're in development.
I mean, maybe, yeah, it's something we can explore, right? In every package that I have declared a peer dep period, that I copy the identical peer dep range into the dev dep so that CI can install it in all the appropriate version configurations. So, and that I've been saying that that's the best practice for half a decade, is that everything that's a peer dep should be listed as an identical dev dep. The tooling doesn't require that, but like, it would be really nice if that didn't become invalidated.
Yeah, the flip side there is, if you declare if all of your workspaces declare all of their peer deps as dev deps, you're never going to have an e-resolve problem, which is nice, but it's also sort of a downside if those e-resolve errors are doing some work for you, right? Or trying to kind of show you that things won't be compatible in production.
Right. Well, like in a non-workspace environment, that advice holds. It's in the workspace environment that it's a question mark. And part of what I hope the shared mode, shared layout, or whatever would resolve is making it ergonomic basically making it ergonomic to author each child workspace package as if it was an independent repo, and but then they just happen to live in the same repo, and NPM helps me easily automate tasks across them all, like, as opposed to saying I have to author the child project differently because it's in the monorepo.
Right.
That's like what I would hope for.
I think that is a goal. Like,
yeah. I mean, that also makes it really easy to bring things in and eject things out as needed. And the fewer obstacles you have, the fewer barriers to exit, the fewer barriers to entry. So that's like, I think it's a really important thing to have.
So what are the next steps in terms of this, Isaac? Or how close do we have to change this RFC based on some of the use cases that were brought up in the 484 peer dep installation? Or do we have to like ratify changes to an existing implemented RFC for like changing the default behavior for peer dep resolution?
Well, so I think we might want to, make a new RFC that is just, and Jordan, if this is a step, if this proposed default that I put in this RFC we're discussing gets you closer to your goal, it might be worthwhile to just write another RFC that's like building on top of it, right? So in addition to blah, also add these steps, and
right,
then we can kind of evaluate, like, does it still solve all of the problems that we hope to? Is it weird enough that it needs to be opt-in in some way or configured in some way, or is it something we can safely just say this is actually going to be the new default?
How quickly are you hoping to land this RFC?
Well, I mean, the implementation of it is literally like 4 lines. So
sure.
I'm tempted to, the sooner we can get it ratified, then the sooner we can actually do it. The change in Arborist is really, really tiny.
I mean, the reason I'm asking is because even though it seems to me like it's a complete step towards what I want, and like a nice subset of what I want, right? The way to be sure would be to write out a full RFC as a delta on this from what I want, and then we can like explore all of those, and then, but like that would require you delaying a few weeks on this.
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
know if that's worth it or not.
It's more important to me to do the right thing than to do it right now, especially since we're going into the holidays.
Cool.
But I don't know, Darcy's a little more the
pushing
Eng manager, project manager here, so I'll leave it up
in
to him.
time. Yeah, the hope is that Vincent's unblocked from doing the work to implement isolated mode, which I
Mhm.
think is possible to continue that work like without landing that work and without like he is unblocked. So yeah, like I think we can continue to work without having to wait for this to actually get accepted, let's say.
The way that we kind of landed with isolated mode too is, and this is just to agree with you and add some technical details to that. The way we landed with isolated mode is that it's a deterministic transform of any arbitrary tree into its sort of isolated counterpart, with the only difference being increased deduplication and the inability to load any modules that you don't have an explicit dependency on. But any tree that we end up generating, in terms of like anything that is shared will still be shared. Anything that is, all the versions that you were previously resolving to, you're still going to resolve to, except for things that you don't have an explicit dependency on, which will be unavailable unless they're at top level depth, and except for the fact that the paths will be, these like weird hash paths.
I have a possibly related question. I believe PNPM and Yarn PNP use, if something is present as an optional peer dep, but not a regular peer dep, such that older clients don't see it at all and newer clients only see it as optional. Does NPM do something with that? Or is that a Yarn and PNPM specific, or maybe even Yarn specific behavior?
So I don't know what Yarn does exactly with, I don't want to comment on what Yarn or PNPM do with optional peer deps. But what NPM does with optional peer deps is we ensure that if the version exists, if the version is resolvable, it has to be a valid match for the stated dependency range. And,
right, I'm talking about when the stated dependency range in peer dependencies is omitted, and the only mention in the entire package JSON is in peer dependencies meta, where a package name is marked as optional.
Oh, if it's not also a peer dep, we just ignore it. We don't even look in peer dependencies meta for it ever.
Okay, and so the reason that that's relevant is that I've been told on one of my packages where someone's trying to make that change, that is an escape hatch for PNP at least, where if you do that, then Yarn will make it available to require from that project, even though there's no version constraint applied. And
so it's like make the link for me, even though wow, that's a weird
right, that was my reaction. But like I'm wondering if that's something we would want to think about around isolated mode, and if so, how would that affect this RFC and my RFC as well?
I mean, it's worth it's not a big change from what we already have specified under isolated mode, but we're not going to install it by default. But it's like it's sort of like if it's listed in peer deps meta, then go ahead and make it available.
Like make sure it's present in the node modules of or the root of the workspace or something.
If it would have been reachable by that tree. So essentially the way that the transform works is we go through each node. We say, what are the edges out from that node? We create a hash based on the hashes of all those things and the integrity of the node. And those things that it has a dependency on, that it has an edge out on, are symlinked in to be made available to it. So we could say that if any of its, non-peer dep things in peer dependencies meta was reachable in the original hoisted tree, then the version that it would reach and find and resolve to will also be linked in and included in that set. I'm not sure off the top of my head what kind of implications that would have, but essentially it would be just another thing kind of added to that set. So it doesn't seem like it would be a huge lift. So really we would have to see kind of how widespread and how essential is that particular escape hatch, or does it make sense to have something a little bit more explicit, something that looks less like a mistake?
Right. I mean, my understanding is that Yarn has hard coded a bunch of popular packages in this fashion to like make things available to them that aren't explicitly dependent on. But that this
Also,
is the thing that they suggest packages do to
we
make it
also
work with
have
PNP.
we have a different escape hatch already, right? Which is make it a top level dep. If it's a
Right.
top level dep, it will be available to everything no matter what, because it's in the root node modules folder. There's nowhere around that.
And that works within the workspace, but in this case, this is ESLint plugin import, and the people who install it, like there's anyway. Without going into the details, it's about the consumers who can't be living within the workspace. But it seems
the people who install it can also install whatever it needs as a top level.
As a top level, absolutely, and that's the
And
current.
So by relying on shadow deps, by relying on shadow deps, I mean, you're putting a little bit of onus on your consumers, which
Right.
I think is probably fair.
Right. So it's I guess what I'm not necessarily advocating for the only meta feature.
Mhm.
I'm pointing out that it seems to be an escape hatch for this sort of thing, and if it's something that we would need around changing how hoisting works in workspaces, then I just wanted to bring it up in case, I don't want it to end up. I want us to end up leaving space for design space for it if that's a thing we might need, even though I'm not necessarily advocating for it because it seems weird.
So I think the key is let's write down the use case, and
Sure.
then and then what are the mechanisms in which we have available to us today or don't, and how would what we propose solve for that use case. Right. So it's just simply let's figure out what use case Yarn and Yarn PNP and PNPM have supported or why they've done that, and then propose it and just be how do we work backwards from supporting that, or do we even have that problem? Right. Cool. Any other comments on this work? If not, Jordan, it sounds like there's a big ask here from you to try to build upon this or show, like you said, the delta between what you want to write. So yeah, so I'll leave it as that being the major action item here. Cool. I added this last agenda item on here. I think Caleb, I saw you joined, and you also had this RFC, which I didn't add to the agenda initially, but tacked on here. I'm not sure if you want to speak to it, but it's number 486, resolving registry overrides. Not sure if you're available to speak to this, but feel free if you want to.
Speak to this. I think that I cut it last night, so people probably haven't had a chance to read it. The gist is that at my workplace, we build packages using different custom registries. And currently, we have to modify the package lock by removing the resolved key to allow us to change the registry. The default registry, registry.npmjs.org, is a magic value that always means the current registry. So if you have a lock file that uses the default registry, you can switch to a custom registry. But if you already have a lock file with a custom registry, you can't switch to another registry. You can't switch back to the default registry, or you can't switch to a new custom registry. So this RFC proposes a new value, a new npm config option, which would simply disable generating the resolved key in lock files.
I think that's great synopsis.
I mentioned one other problem with npm 7 that we have. It actually changed the way that npm shrink wrap files are handled, and now npm 7 uses the resolved key, which in our case can lead to using a registry that is blocked by our network isolated CI tools.
I think I saw an issue that came up as well. Somebody else actually filed an issue. I believe it might. I'm not sure if that was yourself or someone else as well that identified that as a problem to us.
Yeah, I cut npm CLI 3783.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not sure where we've landed on that, or if you've gotten somebody from the team that's already responded.
That bug is just marked as needs triage.
Okay. Can you drop a link to that actually, if you can?
Yeah, it's also linked in the RFC. I think that issue is pretty complicated because, never mind.
Awesome, thank you for that.
There's also
we can leave it.
RFC, which I saw this morning.
Awesome. We'll probably leave this on the agenda unless folks have any comments right now, initially looking through this. Probably leave it on the agenda for next week as well, unless we can respond asynchronously. Yeah, this is definitely something we want to fix for y'all if it's like breaking anything for you.
Responding async or handling this next week, or they both sound great to me.
Cool. Anybody have any comments on this specifically, or want to bring up any other items that weren't on the agenda? If not, I'll give y'all about 20 minutes time back and hope we can continue the conversation in the RFCs themselves, and see you next week. Cheers.